I'm Joe. I'm on the Tech Terrace, and I do cyber.
And Jason Luce. And before I get started, I just want to tell you a really quick story before we jump into this. So about a month ago, my wife and I were hiking Mount Washington in New Hampshire. And if people are familiar at all, it's notorious for its dangerous weather and its rapidly changing weather. Something like 160 people have died hiking Mount Washington. So we're hiking through the snow and these trails through the woods, and about 3 hours into the hike, you come up out of the trees at tree line and you're looking at kind of this broad, rocky summit of Mount Washington. And in early April, still covered in ice and snow, and sun and clouds mixed, and the sun's shining down. We begin the trek up towards the top of the mountain, and the spikes on our shoes are crunching in the snow as we're walking up towards the summit. And we get to the summit, clouds have started to roll in, but you have these amazing panoramic views across the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And so we're up there and enjoying the views, and it's also really cold. And so it's probably in the teens, and the wind is 30 to 40 miles per hour. It started to get a little wet, so we start walking down. And we start walking a little faster, and we realize it has gotten really cold, and the clouds are really coming in, and there's rain and sleet, whatever is happening, and it's cold, and we start walking faster. Heart's starting to pound a little bit, and you start thinking about these are the moments you read about, of the things that happen up there. And then suddenly in a moment, it feels like the clouds have come in completely around us. Can't see more than 20 feet, and we both stop. And I remember in that moment, Mary turns to me and we kind of lock eyes, and she says, "This is not good." We kind of pause for a minute, we look at each other, and then we kind of nod and we get to work. And so one of us is quickly getting out gear, making sure we're as warm and dry as we can. The other's looking at the map, looking at our GPS, making sure we know where we're going. And we set on our way, and we're trying to rush, but at the same time not go too fast. Don't want to lose the trail. So we get our way, and we're talking to each other the whole way. And then finally, after an hour and a half, we get back towards the trees and the top of the trail. We know it's smooth sailing from there. 3 hours later, we're back down at the car, looking up at the summit of Mount Washington, covered in clouds at this point, and we're laughing and smiling, and we had a great time. So why am I telling you this? So I'm telling you this story because we've all had journeys, whether they're physical journeys or digital, security and compliance journeys, that feel pretty perilous in moments. And I think actually a lot of what got us through that are the same things that get you through security and compliance journeys, and are the same types of things we're going to talk about here today in terms of clear objectives, good planning, great communication, the importance of those things getting through difficult situations. And so with that, we'll hand it back to Joe. Want us to dive in?
Well, at first, we have to have a disclaimer. Everybody's really aware of this by this point in time. So here you go. Beautiful disclaimer for you to read real quick. All right, so NIST compliance. I love compliance. When NIST comes out with new regulations, I am so excited. That is my bedtime reading. I stay up late. I will read that till 3 a.m. Not joking, that's how much I like compliance. And so my job was to do NIST compliance at a startup that had no clue what exactly needed to be done. And so welcome to your talk, where we're about to show you receipts of everything that did not go well, a few things that did go well, and we're going to show you that we were enemies, and we are sort of friends-ish at times to this day over this whole journey. So the key of our compliance journey was to make sure that the data of our customers and our product was secure. But there's all these other challenges that we faced, and we're going to go through that. And we're going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how we stopped getting in each other's ways. So this was our journey. This was our original plan. I mean, there weren't Pac-Man or Ghost involved with it, but I thought that was more fun. So that's what we're going to get today. So our first step was to pick a framework. And if you've noticed, I'm the orange ghost, Jason's the red ghost. And we will fight throughout this whole presentation, and I'm not even remotely joking. So everybody knows about NIST, right? Everybody's like, yes, I have read every NIST slide ever. We are so good with this, Joe. Yes. So we're going to focus primarily on NIST 800 TAC 53. And this presentation is based on Rev 4, going into Rev 5. So you know the kind of the storyline of that. But many of our customers are DIB, and so we use the CMMC, which is NIST 800 TAC 171. So we have to meet requirements of both and be able to translate both, which leads to lots of problems a lot of the time. So here's the story, round one, security versus engineering. I told you guys I brought receipts. This is straight from our Slacks. Didn't edit, there's nothing else there. So this is how it started. We slowly started getting it figured out, things like that, because we had kind of understood before Jason started what framework we were gonna do. He had no idea what he was about to get himself into.
And so when I started in January of last year with the target of going through FedRAMP in July, and so I knew our customers generally, knew the importance of CMMC, knew generally the journey we were going on. And what felt so good to me is talking to the CEO, and I remember speaking with him over lunch when we were still deciding if I was going to join the company. And he told me about this, and he told me how everything was going great. Everything was spot on, we got it all figured out, just come in, just make sure nothing falls off the rails, but otherwise, everything is looking good. Isn't exactly where we were at this point. So I came in running engineering and security, so right out of the gate, I had to understand what both sides needed. So I didn't really know the product, I didn't really know the people in the company at this point, but immediately had to understand what was happening on both sides of that equation between security, compliance, and engineering. And so then we get into the interesting challenges. So what do those groups do? And even starting from what do those groups think the other group does? And I'm sure in this room, I'm sure we have people representing compliance functions and security and technology groups and people who are in other business functions. I'm sure we have a whole mix of people here. We debated actually having you separate into groups in the room, but we didn't have time for it. I'm sure when you look across and you think you know what your peers do, and I think maybe you don't always know as well as you think you do. And so from a perspective of engineering, often engineers think of security as the ones that make the rules and buy the tools. They think of it like airport security, which is, you know, it's really, really important, and deep down you appreciate it, but day to day, it actually just feels like a huge hassle in what engineers are trying to do every day.
I mean, I have pre-checks, so I'm not really worried about the airport security. How many people are engineers in this room? So I knew who I'm gonna offend this whole time. How many engineers? Okay, I'm good to go. All right, so what security thinks engineering does? If I had to write it down on this sticky note, this is what I would write. They make the product work, they write some code updates, sometimes they copy it from other things, build some features that the customers want, and fix bugs. Do I actually know what those things actually entail? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Mm-mm. So as we went along on our journey, we had lots of things that we planned to use. We were like, okay, team, what do you want to use? And so we're like, yes, let's use Trend Micro. Let's use Burp Suite. Let's use all these different tools. And because we're in the FedRAMP environment, we don't actually get all the new fun features that you guys will see on the expo floor at all. We get the 2 years ago version. And that kind of tripped us up, to be real honest, because we'd look on the website and be like, oh, it can do these things, except when we bought the FedRAMP government version, it couldn't. And so we ended up switching a lot of those as we switched team members, because they're like, no, this can't do what it need to do, even though we already had purchased it. So we made a lot of mistakes in purchasing because we purchased before we really looked at all those requirements.
And so we lost a couple people early on in the team. So we had a director of engineering, we had a DevOps lead, and as Joe said, those are the people that had been involved in helping to make some of these choices. And losing them was a big knowledge loss. At the same time, it was also an opportunity. It was an opportunity to change a little bit the way we were looking at our approach, a way to revisit some of the decisions, which in the end I think was actually a good thing, and looking at how we would make those decisions.
So as we go along, let's talk about what we're really doing, because when we sat in meetings up to this point in time, we just assumed we knew what the other person does, right? Like, I can write on a sticky note, no problem whatsoever. And so we had to sit down and really understand what the other person did. And so this is what the things I would write on my resume that I do. Lots of paperwork, all the paperwork repeatedly again and again and again, along with some fun things like looking for anomalies and cleaning up malware and ransomware.
And on the engineering side, when we think about what engineers really do, I saw something interesting recently that said that typical modern SaaS software engineer spends about 50% of their time doing work that isn't coding. And that's not bad. That's the way things are these days. And if you think about what engineers are doing, they're working with product team members or design team members to figure out what's actually going to get built. They're working with their peers on code reviews or architectural designs. They're documenting their work. They're fixing bugs. They're doing reliability improvements. They're doing performance improvements. They're doing security improvements, other software implementations. And all alongside that, they're also trying to do the things that will further their skills. So it's a lot of complexity and a lot of dynamism in what engineers do day to day that really complicates this picture. And so the takeaway here is just how critical it is to understand each other's roles. And there are two ways to think about that. One, write them down. Actually, when you're looking at your journeys and what you're doing, make sure you actually know what everyone's roles are, what their responsibilities are, and actually write it down in detail. And then the other part of it is to recognize that the people in these different roles have different backgrounds, different experiences, and it's important to tailor the information to each of those groups and understand that difference that's going to come up.
It took us a long, long time just to get here. And you're like, Joe, we already looked at this slide. Well, we visit this slide a lot, determining the requirements. You might see it a few more times, so don't worry about that. But we want to really emphasize is you have to look at that again and again and again and understand what the other party is doing again and again and again. Because it's not a one-time kind of activity. And when we look at these frameworks and these requirements, it's really, really easy for me to say, okay, let's look at this control. SA Tech 8, whatever enhancement you want. This is what I need done. And engineers go, but what am I doing? How, Joe? And I'm like, I just read you the words. And they're like, yeah, but just tell me what to do. And I'm like, oh, no, you get to pick. And they're like, no, that's not what we do at all. So, well, the first year we did this, we really didn't look at the requirements like that. I just handed it out and said, read the words, and they said, okay. They nodded their heads and went on smartly. This was pure chaos, and we had to redo it. So, well, more receipts because we weren't on the same page. We weren't on the same book. We weren't even in the same library. We weren't even reading the same language. And so we were sitting here going, wait, what? What are we doing? And wait, who does what when? Wait, is this here? There was a lot of questions that nobody thought to ask ahead of time because no one knew who had that responsibility in that role in it. And so, yes, there was a lot of things. And when you look at this and you go, hey, maybe I don't have access to this, or is this an IT function, and who's in charge of IT functions? Does that fall under security? Does that fall under engineering? Does that actually fall under finance where our IT sits? Where does that sit? And how do we figure that out and keep it going together all of the time? So as we determine the actual plan, my version of the plan is really, really cute, right? I made beautiful presentations. I held many meetings. Everybody said, sounds great. Yep, we know the plan. We know what we want. Here's some resources. We know that there's control families. All engineers hate the SA control family and the configuration management one. I know. We just have to do a lot of paperwork, right? We're good to go. No worries. But it wasn't actually helpful to the whole team. It was helpful to me because I was giving out information, but they weren't really understanding it, and there was no really specific planning.
And so my version of the plan is based on my experience, which has been largely on the engineering side. So I've been in tech for 30 years or so, and half that time leading teams. So I come in with what I think is a very structured approach of understanding where we're going, defining those desired outcomes, documenting the requirements, looking and assessing the gaps that are there, and understanding the resources it's going to take to go execute on those things that we need to do, executing that work and validating it and reviewing it, and then setting things forward on maintenance and continuous cycles from there. And so that's what I was pushing for when I came in. Just pushing for that clarity of let's move faster, let's get these things defined, write these things down, go execute on them. But we weren't quite there yet. So I was coming in and pushing hard on a bunch of these things before I think we're actually ready for us to do that. That created a little bit of strife.
A little bit, just. But we sat here and we had meetings about meetings, and people who had never signed up to do security and compliance now were doing it probably 80% of their time, and they weren't doing their actual regular jobs. We had to identify how to translate each one of those controls that we had to do for each team and we had to translate across teams so everybody understood the parts of it. So a lot of the time, if engineering needed a security tool, well, security buys it, engineering implements it, and then we bring in IT because we have to, bring it into all of our systems for security. So it was a lot of working together and figuring all those different things out. And there's a lot of times I know every person what link that they like from what website. I know if they want a meeting. I know if they want a Slack, if they want something else. I had to figure out what each person understood so we could move this forward. And still to this day, sometimes we get tripped up, but we'll say, you know what, I'm not quite understanding that, but maybe I can. So try it again. Let's have somebody else. And sometimes Jason has to come to translate. Maybe a lot of times, but.
And that was one of the big takeaways for me in this, was sometimes to just slow down and align more and align some more. And I really realized that was the key part of my job in all of this. So I came in looking to push, looking to drive the team forward, and initially was missing that part of really what was needed was for somebody to try to help align across the groups that were involved in all of this. And so I'm responsible for security and engineering. I know in some companies they say you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't align them, you need the separation of concerns, you need the responsibility. For us in a startup, that was one of those things that enabled success for us, was to be able to anchor that together. So at the end of the day, there was one person, which ended up being me, who ended up having the accountability for it and forced me to step in and sit with both sides and understand what was blocking the way, how we aligned, and how we would try to move forward.
And with that accountability and that understanding, guess what? We're back to the slide again. I know, right? It's weird. We had to determine those requirements. We really had to determine them because it wasn't just to meet that compliance requirement and the security requirements. There was business requirements that had to be taken into consideration too. And we can't just hire everybody under the sun. We don't have a magic pot of gold. So we had to do with what the resources that we had, plus still allow them to do their own jobs. So, we didn't understand what everybody did not understand. So we were back here once more. So I'm still angry at this slide. I'm gonna be really honest. This message right here, I probably almost quit over, and I'm not joking. I was like, I'm not gonna do this. You can go figure out however to do whatever you want. Because I read this, and if you look at the Slack message, it says, you see way down on number 4, your recommendation. And in my mind that said, your experience doesn't matter. That's how I took it. Because remember, this is over Slack, there's no conversation. Said, first of all, you tell me your reference information. Next, you're gonna tell me the SSP. Then we're gonna go any kind of auditor information. And then I guess if we have time, maybe your professional experience we'll talk about, and then we'll get to the business security trade-offs. So angry. Up above it, you'll see an email that says, it was a group email that ended up kind of paring down and said, you know what, if you don't like this, basically, you can talk to me on the one-on-one, because you know what, this isn't going anywhere and it's not working, so shh, is how I took that.
We said we were gonna keep it raw and very honest as far as how our journey went, what went well and what didn't go well. And from my point of view in this, as CTO of the company, I have a technology role and a business role. And so I'm really looking at this through the lens the whole time of, can I explain what we're doing to other executives? Using that as a benchmark for, do we understand the problem well enough to explain it simply and concisely to each other across teams? And so that's what I was using in my head, is this understanding and ability that we should be able to explain anything to other executives, since this was a key thing for us as a company. And so that's what I was pushing on, is this clarity of information and the poking and the prodding. And I will admit, I do often enjoy the role as the inquisitor and the devil's advocate, and I really like that process. I will say, my wife actually has told me a number of times she finds it super annoying. And so apparently, Joe may also feel the same way. But I think the biggest problem with it is I hadn't actually explained that to anybody. I didn't actually say, I'm asking all of these questions because I also need to be able to go explain to our CEO, to our CMO. I need to be able to explain where we are and what the challenges are in our journey. And without me explaining it, this came across like I was just a huge pain in the ass, and I was doubting everything everybody said and was poking at everybody.
I mean, you're still a pain in the ass, so, So this challenge is we have this chaos because in the startup world, we don't really have a lot of set things. It's kind of, we're firefighting, drinking from the hose all the time. So we needed to do something with that chaos. We had to organize it. And we had to get everybody on the same page, understanding each other. And even though we would write words to each other, and like you saw on the last slide, I was mad. I was really, really mad. I went on a 2-hour walk. I just walked out of my office, and I work from home. So, that's how mad I was. So often it's a friction. And to this day, this is one of the biggest friction points that we face.
And so then there was this moment of realizing it, and I'll just call it a few words if people in the back can't read this fully. One of the things Joe said in this message, I don't speak engineer well. And this is actually a light bulb moment for me. And suddenly in that moment of all these questions and the months we've gone through, all the pain to this point, in that comment, I had that moment of recognizing what was really going on, is that we actually were very well aligned on most of what we were doing. We were very much aligned on the objective. We were very much aligned on most of the things that we were going to have to do to get there. But the biggest problem was that we were just talking past each other. We weren't fully recognizing how we have totally different backgrounds, very different styles, very different sets of experience. We hadn't really approached that and taken that head on. So this for me was just a huge moment. I think started to shift how we were able to work together.
And it was. And if you have your laser pointer right on there, if you go to where it says, in the middle of his paragraph, it says, not because I don't trust you. And that was the one key point of this whole paragraph that really hit home for me, because that was what I was thinking. When you looked at that last message, it was like, oh, your opinion doesn't matter, da, da, da. But here, he made it very clear, no, it's not because I don't trust you. There's these other things going on in here. So this was our first breakthrough. And we just figured out that we don't know what the other area does, and we really have to simplify it and ask the questions. I have specifically asked him numerous times, define the word security in your terms, define what you think compliance means in your terms. And I'm not joking. We have done this many times because it moves and improves as we go and move along.
And the takeaway here is it is just a different language, people. Security and engineering, compliance, can all sound like we're saying the same words, we're reading off the same things, and we're talking to each other with the same words all the time. But they do have very different meanings. Again, because we have the different experiences, the different things we see and hear and listen to and what we experience. And so this is where, for us, a key part of this is establishing the difference between things that are facts or things that we're working off of. So that could be actual standards that we're reading from, assumptions, all the interpretation that happens throughout the team of what some of these things might mean, opinions that may occur throughout, and then ultimately the decisions that we drive to. And trying to get clear on what each of those are throughout was really important, to make sure we knew the difference. Someone in engineering is saying, oh, we have to go implement this thing. Well, that might be an assumption or an opinion, isn't necessarily a fact that we're working off. And one of the things that we found really helpful in here, I encourage all of you to think about if you're not doing this, is driving the collaborative authoring of the documents that we had. And so forcing people to get together and actually collaborate on the words that would be written down about how we were implementing things and the decisions that we made were crucial. Taking control language, which is often really vague, super hard to understand, and just handing it to an engineer and saying, go build that, doesn't work. Having these hard gates where somebody makes a decision, writes a document, hands it to a group of people, and just says, great, provide me feedback on this doc and then go build it, doesn't work. Forcing people to get together and be collaborative around it is where we started finding we could really bring people together on common meaning.
It's exciting, right? We moved past it finally. We have finally said, hey, we're going to commit to a plan. We had to agree that we needed to work on this big plan together. It wasn't compliance job to say, this is everything I need you to do. We need to have those collaborative conversations and work on that plan together. And it was okay if we weren't on the same book. As long as we were traversing that same path towards that same goal, we had to agree that that was okay. And we worked on it again and again. And we started to get that communication flow, and that path started getting worn, and it felt natural to us. And I kind of think of it as, you know how they talk about love languages? Like everybody has their love language? Well, there's work languages. I guarantee you there has to be some book on this. There's work languages, and you got to figure out how each person works And you have to, go to those skills. And sometimes you have to bring other people in because you can't get that through to them, but you want to make sure that you are making them feel confident in the skills that they have to do and the tasks that, are assigned to them.
And we're all human, right? It's the little things in life. If you're feeling a little warm and fuzzy reading this, that's wonderful. You should. This is the moment where we connect. But the bigger piece here was that as we started to connect better and work through these things, that really helped carry through the entire team.
But we sucked at celebrating the wins. We were kind of getting as a team better, but we sucked at this. And I'm not even we did nothing. We were like, wait, what were we doing? And I think the biggest problem was there was an illusion that there was an end to this journey. And in security and compliance, everything is a cycle. Everybody knows this. Every chart that you ever see, there's no end, there's no line. It's just circles all the time, never ending. We're just trying to get better. In engineering, guess what? They definitely have ends to everything. They have sprints, they have PIs, there's definitions of done, which they don't have that over here. We're like, no, we just keep on doing it. We just have to do that. And we weren't smart enough to step away and celebrate those small wins or even the big wins in a timely manner. And it got exhausting, very exhausting.
I do suck at this. This is one of those, people have the interview questions, which probably everyone hates, of where's an area you can improve, or what are you not good at? I'll say celebrating wins has probably been on my list of things for at least a decade now. But it's interesting, I actually read a great book, Strength to Strength by Arthur C. Brooks, and he talks about strivers. So he talks about the people that just love driving forward and solving that next problem and doing the next thing, and it's the next rep, it's the next problem, it's the next goal, it's the next achievement. And I think probably many of you here probably fit into that category. And it's exciting, and I do like to do that. I love winning at things, I love learning, I love that challenge. But there's a challenge with it, which is when you love that enough, then actually hitting the milestone and the goal becomes a little anticlimactic. Because the dopamine hit is actually in the fight and it's in the grind, that's the fun part. And then when you hit the milestone, there's a letdown and you just look for the next thing. So this was a big challenge for us, something I'll be trying to get better at for the rest of my life.
So everybody will recognize this messaging, right? This is from my phone. And as we talk about celebrating the milestones and the wins and all those sorts of things, we didn't even let people outside of our team celebrate this. We didn't let the organization celebrate this or anybody that had supported this journey. And, it sucked because, you eventually get that really big thing and then there's nothing because you're already on to the next thing and it doesn't feel good. And, we determined that we really needed to define winning as a team and celebrate that as a team.
And yes, if you'll notice, this text message is not between Joe and I.
It is not.
I'm the subject of this message here. But this was hard. And as Joe just alluded to, I think the challenge in particular was just even knowing when we were done. And again, that is a huge thing to recognize with product and engineering teams, is that sense of completing work and shipping code and shipping a product or shipping a feature. And there's always a moment to celebrate and be done. And as Joe said, all of you know this, when you go through this, it's never done. We weren't even done with definitions of things. We would define things like periodic, and we would go implement things, and then a month later we'd come back and say, well, what is periodic? What does that mean? And then we'd go define it again, and we'd go revisit it, and we'd keep going to work through things. And so I ended up thinking about this, if everyone knows the phrase, when one door closes, another opens, this beautiful sentiment of opportunity. Actually going through this process, ended up thinking of that phrase in a really kind of dark, twisted, reverse way, which is when every door closes, meaning you've completed a body of work and we've closed the door and you turn around, another door opens, and behind it is another pile of compliance requirements that we then have to go execute on again. And that is how it felt at times going through this. It made it so hard for us to actually celebrate the great moments that the team hit along the way.
So, when you have, like you said, that pile of requirements right after that door, it's those gaps, right? That means, we had to see what they were. And as we go forward we got really good at identifying these gaps. So you're gonna think about this and you're gonna go, okay, how are we dealing with this? What are we doing with this? Are gaps between communication? Do we have, after you have an audit, you move into different things, and what are those gaps and how are we gonna fix them? And we still had those same communication and understanding issues at this point, and determined it was just easier to identify gaps in our systems, and we ended up backsliding with that, a lot of this.
And one of the key things that's called out here, security feels like rework. And it's amazing the impact this has on the team. And so I think about this like building a swimming pool. And so if people have built one, seen one built, if not, you can imagine it pretty easily. But thinking of a pool with all the rebars, when they first come in, they're taking all of the rebar and building a structure of a pool and putting in the plumbing and putting in all of the cement around it. And that is the structural integrity and everything that runs it. And then you do all the other work, and maybe at the end, you put a nice fence up around it to keep it safe. I think a lot of engineers think of security like that fence, like a perimeter around what they're doing. And everyone is trying to continually change that thinking, but it is still the way people tend to think about it. And so what happens is when compliance requirements come in, or we identify something we need to change security-wise, the default thinking of so many of the engineers is that, oh, I'll have to go repair the fence. And so they go, oh, I can repair the fence, or I can replace a section of fence, or even if I have to replace a big section of fence, it's just the fence. That's not that bad. But the reality is the security is like the rebar and all of the plumbing and everything that's underneath the pool. You don't see it. But without it, it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't be stable, and it wouldn't be safe. So what ends up happening is the engineers then need to break apart cement and get in and change things and patch it up and get back out. And that leaves people feeling like for every 3 steps forward they take in building and shipping a product that's driving the company, they're having to take 2, if not 3 or 4 steps back sometimes, and feeling like it's constantly rework.
Talk about that constant rework, right? Continuous monitoring. They were like, wait, what, Joe? Why are we clapping? I was like, continuous monitoring. We finally got to that stage. They're like, wait, no. You said if we did this, we were going to be done. I said, yeah, with that part, but we get to do the fun stuff now, continuous monitoring. And I said, we get to do that. They're like, That meeting had a lot of really, really angry words, and everybody felt like their efforts were for absolutely nothing, because why? If we still have to do continuous monitoring, it's still that same amount of work. Why do you keep asking us for more? And, with continuous monitoring, there's a side of POAM, right? Plan of action and milestones. And with that, we also needed to be like, okay, we stopped everything else to get to this point where we're to continuous monitoring in the POAM, but we also need to do this other thing called product features, I guess.
And this prioritization is such a challenge. And to shine a light on it for those who don't see it all the time, the way this contention often plays out is typical software engineer is feeling like they have product managers that are then putting work on them to go build the product that nominally is what the company does. And then you have engineering managers or technical teams with a bunch of other initiatives that then are kind of coming in out of the side. And then there are all these compliance requirements that just kind of drift down onto teams. And for a lot of engineers and engineering managers, engineering leaders, honestly, the job sometimes week to week is a matter of deciding, who am I going to disappoint today? And that's the way it often feels to people, is you just kind of pick. Like, hey, this person's in a good mood, I guess I'll disappoint them. Well, the real issue there is understanding the clarity of the objectives that you're getting towards. And that's a thing we realized and hammered home over and over and over with the team. For us as a company, our customers, CMMC is a critical part of their journey. So it's critical to us, which meant moving towards FedRAMP was critical for us, which led us to 853. And that could become an objective that was clear across the entire company, not just security, compliance, and engineering, but product teams and sales teams and marketing teams, to everybody. That was the objective. And by aligning those objectives, then the prioritization and the staffing falls into place. Then we have a sequence of priorities, and we can assign people to them.
And how do we get to there? Well, remember all those levels? We went through them all again, just really, really quick, because everything that we had sort of forgot, because we thought we were past it already. And so we had to get everybody back on the same page. And like Jason said, it wasn't just security, compliance, engineering. It was the whole organization, because everybody had to talk about it. Everybody had to be the subject matter expert, because everybody was asking questions. And if anybody works with CMMC, it's been a little roller coaster lately. And all these different things over the past 2 years. And then you add into, okay, well, if you're going to buy products, they don't have CMMC. And so a lot of my time is spent with clients explaining, no, we don't have CMMC, we have FedRAMP. And they're like, those are different words. And we had to figure all those sorts of things out. And so engineers often see that moving compliance requirements, like I said, big circle all the time, they're just disruptors. And so how can I help fix that? How can I make that work better? So I changed how I work. Engineers don't work in cycles, absolutely not. So I learned about sprints and PIs and all those sorts of good things. And I said, okay, how can we make things short term? How can I explain these things? Can you do it in this amount of time? Can we do these things well? How many sprints do you need? How do you need a PI? How much money do you need? Do you have enough resources? I started asking those questions that I'd never asked before.
And so the takeaway is to work as a team. And 3 big things that we went through that I would encourage all of you to think about. So one is moving DevOps towards DevSecOps. We all hear this, we all talk about it, but is enabling and giving security practices to those DevOps teams, not just drifting requirements upon them. They end up owning a huge body of work. So having them integrally involved with those practices is critical. So I talked about a moment ago. Number 2 is getting clear objectives. Teams end up all the time across organizations where everyone has their own goals that they have to go hit. And ultimately, everyone then is just going to fight for the things they think they're going to be held responsible for. Need to align the teams around common objectives when it comes to achieving these types of compliance projects. And then the third is treating requirements around compliance or security like product requirements in a software development space. Software engineers are used to having someone explain to them the why of what they're going to go build, and they collaborate closely on the what, and they go back and forth and debate and discuss what they're going to build before they go and actually execute on it. There's no reason that compliance requirements or security requirements can't go through that same process. Sit down, talk with the teams, discuss the what, make sure they know why any of it matters to begin with, and talk and go back and forth and understand which things are set in stone and can't be changed and which things are implementation decisions, and discuss it together as a team.
And not saying because security said so. That is one of my absolute biggest pet peeves, because I'd hear from somebody in a different meeting, they said security said we had to do this. I said, what? We're a blocker because why? They're like, I don't know, security said we had to do it. I said, well, that's one person who does security, and this one person didn't say that, so where are we getting this from? And often it was a blocker because it was just an unknown. So as we move forward, we're finally to the end of this map that we started way in the beginning. And we ended up on this kind of the same page. Sometimes they say security is a blocker, or let's just make a checkbox on that compliance sheet. And I go, absolutely not, we're not doing that. We're doing it the right way. And we actually have gotten to the point where we are reading that same book, and we're on that same chapter. And engineering is asking those questions when talking about new features. They go, hey, we were thinking about doing this. What would that mean? What other controls do we have to think? They know the word compensating control really well. What can I do to make this work? How can we move through this? Especially now we're talking about AI a lot, and everybody's like, wait, Joe, you just said AI and you have a FedRAMP environment. I said, yeah, I did. And is that a possibility? Because when they think of new features, what can we use? And how does that work out? And we have to figure that out every single time that something comes up. Will it actually work? Can we make it work? And okay, so how is the truth going? Let's just say that this isn't how I'm engineering. No, that's not how I feel. I'll be honest, when I started working with the company and said, hey, Joe, you have to work engineering all the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I should have asked for more money. It was really my thoughts. And now we're kind of like, okay, we can make this work. We can figure this out. Some days are better than others. We definitely raised our voices in more than one meeting last week. And probably had another meeting after that, after we cooled down, to say, hey, let's work through this. Let's figure everything out. Think of it like engineering is on the 200th day of security and compliance Duolingo. So, you can order some food, find the bathroom, but you really can't do much of that. other than that. So, you know, it's sort of there. We're figuring it out. We don't throw things in meetings anymore, so I figure that's a improvement.
We've gotten past that.
We have, yes.
So we're in it as a team. That's the biggest thing we've anchored on. We have common objectives. We have things we're solving for. We agree and disagree as a team.
So this is what you need to know. We could have just skipped to the slide, I guess. We could have just been like, let's just go whoosh, straight to this one. So how do you win at that game of NIST? So you go through each one of these and you repeatedly go through them again and again and again. And sometimes you just have to keep talking and be like, we're stuck at this. How do we get past this? We have to make sure our goals are aligned, and again and again and again. And everybody has to know what the words mean. And I don't know how to emphasize this anymore, is when I say NIST, I need everybody to know what that means. When I say security, I need everyone to know that that's different than compliance and things like that, and working through things. And when they're like, hey, Joe, how do I need to secure this? They're like, I did secure coding. That's good, right? And I'm like, that's amazing. Good job, but no, we have a few more things to do. And so we've worked on that a lot to say, hey, that collaboration always has to be there. And those compliance requirements have to be like product requirements. Speak that same language in there. And mature your DevOps to the DevSecOps. Make sure that we're understanding that. And really take that time to nurture the security engineering relationship, because they do have to work hand in hand all the time. And if they're not talking daily, you're not doing it right.
So the takeaways, what to apply from what you've learned. Joe just broke it down really well. Hopefully us walking through our journey, again, kind of real and raw about this, resonates with people and successes and challenges you've had in your journeys. And hopefully the things that we've run into are good takeaways, things you can think about, things that you can take back to your companies. And so in the weeks and months ahead, only think about the things that we have up here. Take those back, see what applies to you, try to push things forward. But all of the other things aside, if there was one thing alone up here I would ask you and beg and plead of you to take away, if this is not where you're at in your company, is building this one team attitude around security.
All right, we are now to the fun question time. Ask us anything, we might answer, might not. So if you have a question, please come up to the microphones they have set up here. And we're more than happy to answer any questions. Or I can just continue to talk about controls. Because you know what, we could talk about awareness and training, AT. That is my favorite. I'm gonna be real honest. Because you know what, I don't have to ask anybody about that. I just get to do it all by myself. So, yes.
I feel like I have to stand on my tippy toes. How do you get your teams to set a common objective when your other teams are super resilient to any compliance or security progression?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a stab at it first, which I think was declaring company-wide. And I think that's actually where it started, is at company meetings, stating why this mattered to us. This wasn't just a matter of, oh, we're gonna go comply with NIST 853 and everyone just thumbs up. So it really did start from announcing to the entire company that this was critical to our business, and therefore this is how we were going to be executing on decisions. So it took a long time after that, but that was the anchor point.
And we did. We decided as an organization that amount that we were spending on this was going to be put out there to the entire company, so they knew what the risk was.
Excuse me. NIST CSF version 2, governance, the added piece. Did that change your overall game plan, your alignment?
You got this one right?
How are you dealing with it?
You got this one right?
Yeah.
Do you even know what the CSF is?
I do.
Yeah, see, you got it. It did, slightly, but a little different, because we kind of go by our own jam and our own vibe. We do not have FedRAMP where you'll find us in the marketplace. We have FedRAMP moderate equivalency, which is a whole other TED Talk that we'd have to have, but so we play by slightly different rules. Yes, over there.
What role do you think the government plays in facilitating some of this? So if somebody were coming at it from the NIST perspective, or the FedRAMP program perspective, or an agency that's doing an ATO or something that has procured something with a vendor, that I think there's a large chasm sometimes between the government and those vendors. So
Yes.
what would you say is the best way the government can contribute to facilitating this teamwork approach across?
I think they have to put out information. So a lot of our clients, the problem is they don't know. They'll be like, hey, what do I need to do here? And they'll ask us questions. They'll be like, you guys seem like you know what you're talking about, so how do I do this? And I think the government has the same problem as we had in the beginning, is they were like, yeah, here you go, here's all the information. Woo! And everybody's like engineering going, what? You need to help, you break this down. You need to talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old, break it down. We need this clear and concise, else nobody's gonna do it. And if nobody does it, we're gonna end up in a worse spot than we are now.
And I think there's a removal of ambiguity that goes
Yes.
along with that. It's depending on what worlds people are coming from, but dealing with FedRAMP moderate equivalency, it had a definition, and then there's a DoD memo that is kind of vague about what it means, and maybe it doesn't exist. So that kind of thing, that would be my number one on the wish list, is stop making statements that make all the other things you've been working years on somewhat ambiguous, because then we're left trying to figure it out on a deadline.
Hi, I think you might have already touched on this, but how do you ensure that something like NIST 853 that you've alluded to, sometimes the wordings can be vague, things like periodic, organizational defined frequency, continuous monitoring. How do you take those sort of vague control requirements and make it an understandable and implementable action from the engineering team's standpoint?
So that's a great question, because it happens a lot. And it says, and from Rev 4 to Rev 5 for 800 TAC 53s, it has helped a lot because they did further define those. But a lot of the times what we would do is say, what are we comfortable with doing? And we have great auditors that we can go to and say, we are comfortable doing with this. Would you agree that take in doing those actions would meet this control? And they are more than happy to have that discussion with us.
And just another follow-up on that. So, if I look at the 853, it's like north of 1,000 controls or something like that
Yep.
in there. What does being compliant to NIST 853 look like from you guys' perspective with your journey? Did it mean that you guys had to implement all of those controls, or did you just say, okay, we're doing the low baseline or the moderate baseline or the high?
We're required to do the moderate because of what we do. And yes, so we took some that we didn't do, and we took the hit. And Jason alluded to the memo that we might have to not do that, but we plan to fix everything. And so, like he said, it's a journey.
Who is it? Okay. You're getting the call.
Just to follow up, actually my question was related to what was asked. 853 controls we found were not very implementable, difficult to understand. So, so we used this SSDF for development framework to create the requirements for the development team. Of course, they're mappable to 853. Have you seen that happen? We found that it would be very useful because it has a lot of example implementations in SSDF as well as a lot of activities in there.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, is that something you've seen? Or
Definitely have seen that lots. Lots of different things that we use, like everything under the sun that would say anything that has anything that would help us narrow down that control and have those discussions. We had lots of meetings to be like, how do we break this down so we can provide evidence? And if we're using some other standard, we're gonna bring that in and reference that in our documentation so the auditors know where we pulled it from.
And there's a hard part which we don't love, which is in some of these cases is taking all the information, making what we think is the best judgment we can about implementation, and then working with our auditors during a formal cycle. And in some of these cases, recognizing that it's possible an auditor is going to say that's not exactly what we're looking for. So I think that's where the turns on this is going to be really important, because sometimes it's really hard to know.
wonderful, thank you, nice job today, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, how would you recommend identifying and engaging shadow IT organizations? So I don't know if you need examples for that, or if you don't. It means different things in different contexts, because defining the term.
Yeah, can you really quick in like 10 seconds say what you mean in the context of your question?
So when I worked in healthcare, we had IT people that worked with imaging equipment that were
Okay.
completely out of the information systems department.
Yeah.
And there was, a little bit of butting heads. They don't have the same chain of command. They don't report to the same people where I am now. Natural Resources has all kinds of little tools, and they're spread out all over
Yep.
the state. And they're, well, we're not computer people, we're not IT.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. So I think what we tried to do with it, and I think we have probably less of that than you're talking to, but I think one was this sense of having clear objectives. But when we did this from the start, we met with all of the groups and went through understanding who had to be responsible for different parts of this. And so sometimes it would touch IT, sometimes it leaned into groups that were outside of engineering or security or IT that actually had some involvement because of data that they may touch. So we actually started with executive team at the company and understanding each of those members was accountable for making sure they helped identify team members, and where their help was needed, if we couldn't get it, it was bubbling that back up essentially at an executive level and saying, this is a company directive if we need someone on your team doing something. So it was, in that sense, we had to put a lot of like company governance around the strategy behind it.
All right, we don't have any more time for
We're at time.
questions. We're at time. Thank you very much to everybody for taking time out of your day to listen
Thank
to
you all.
us.